when we start? Can we start? All right. Let's get started. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you. Everyone online, hello. I should make everyone turn around and wave to the online people. There you go. Nice. My name's Justin Magruder. I'm one of the track producers for Track C, which is innovative research. Let me make sure I get this right. Knowledge fit for use. And I think about that hierarchy beginning with data, or ending, I guess, with data, beginning. Information, knowledge, and wisdom. We're getting closer to wisdom. I think we're a few years away, but I hope we get there. I wanted to introduce the speakers for today's session, but first I want to go into a little bit of background. I first came to the MIT IQ conference about 15 years ago. It was fascinating. There were about 25 or 30 of us in the room, I think. Today we're about quite a few more people. It's been a fascinating evolution to see this organization and this group grow and exchange ideas and really, I think, sit on the vanguard of the evolution of data science and data management and all the things we call data today. There's so many data things, data literacy, security that we care about in this session, I think more than any other group I've been with before or since. We've got some vendors here, but we have a lot of practitioners here. A lot of people like me and my team, and I see a few of them in the audience, and thank you guys for patronizing me and coming. You didn't have to. You hear me talk all the time. But I think we have a good thing going here. About 10 years after I came to the first CDOIQ, I was working for a large London-based financial services organization, and we needed someone to help us. We needed one or two or three developers to help us implement a catalog tool. We'd purchased a metadata management system. At the time, it was the leading tool on the market, and we couldn't find anyone who could build it out. There's no one with 10, 15 years of metadata management experience, it turns out. All these new technologies are fascinating and they work really well, but adoption is hard because there isn't a large body of people who know how to use them. So I called around and I started just smiling and dialing, as they say. Wound up talking to people in New York, where I'd spent most of my career, in Europe, where I was working at the time, and I kept getting sent back to this one little company about 5 or 10 miles from my house in Northern Virginia. And so finally I got up and I drove over there and went in and met these guys and wound up getting to know the Incept team, who are going to present today about data quality as a service, insights from a large implementation. I've been working with Incept off and on since then and have a lot of confidence in what they can do. I learned a lot from them. I think maybe I taught them a few things myself. But we have had a really good interaction over the years, and want to introduce you to the team who are going to speak with you today. So I think I'm just going to go through some intros and hand it over to you guys. So first is Mark Larocque. Mark is the COO for Incept. He was not there when I stepped in the room. You joined about 2 or 3 years ago, I think. 3 years ago, yeah. But I met Anurag and Vivek. And Dinesh, I think we talked on the phone a few times. He might have been in the room. And then Sourabh, who's right there, who decided he was not going to participate up front today because for his own reasons. So let me introduce Mark. And Mark, I'll let you introduce the team, if that makes sense. And then I'll step back up with about 5 minutes left, and we'll do some Q&A with the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin, very much. Welcome. You guys have no idea what a great session this is going to be. You're welcome. I have full confidence in the team, that's for sure. First of all, the introduction to the people. Anurag Singh was the main architect for the project that we're going to be talking about. Vivek Patel was the lead on the development side. So essentially, the ideas came very much from Anurag, with contributions from Vivek, of course. Vivek made it happen. So this team, together as a team, was instrumental in leading this project. I was not on the project, just so you know. What was really interesting about this project is that, and I think you've heard a lot about self-service analytics, self-service all the way, but it's a lot harder to implement and to put in place. Forget the people process side, even on the technology side. So let's make it even more complicated. This was for a large pharmaceutical company. We will share this afternoon. We've got a, I'm not gonna say which vendor it was. We're not gonna talk about vendors and technology. We're gonna talk about architecture today and basically the decision process in how we had to actually get this to work. All right, and I'll explain the problems too. But this afternoon, we're gonna go with the vendor that we did it with, and we'll be able to answer your questions. We'll tell you which company it was, and so on and so forth, although we'll probably have to reveal that before the end of the session. All right, the problem was this. We needed to put self-service data quality in place in a large decentralized organization, right? And more complicated than that, it's international in nature. So we're talking about regulations. We're talking about geo-localized data that basically can't be taken out of a certain country. So imagine a data quality service where it has to understand and check the data quality of some data that's sitting on another continent, and it can't get out of there, and I can't see it. So imagine that. So it's a complex thing. It's data is always complex, but this one was quite the one, and we thought that as part of the innovation and knowledge fit for use track, we thought this was something that we could share with you guys, and it's a real implementation, so we're not selling you anything. We're just telling you, here's what we did, here was the thought process, and here's how it worked out. The way we're going to do the presentation, we're going to have Anurag and Vivek come up in one moment, and they're going to present for about 25 minutes or so. And then after that, what we'll do is we'll have a panel in the front, and we're going to add 2 people to this panel. We're going to add another architect in our team, Dinesh Chand, and we're going to also add the client, right? And you'll be able to ask questions of the client, and he'll be able to answer some of these questions. The way we can do the questions, if you want, is go into the app, the WOVA app. You have a Q&A for the session. If you put the questions in there, I can ask the questions to the panel. And then at the end, we'll be able to take questions from the audience. Does that sound like a plan? Yes? All right. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Anurag Singh, the lead architect on the program, please. And Vivek Patel, the lead development. All right. Thank you, guys.
Both of our mics turned on?
Yeah, I think the slides are really cool.
Yeah, let's get to the first slide. I hope you guys can hear me. Thank you very much for coming here. My name is Anurag Singh. I'm one of the architects at Incept. Vivek and I kind of did the solutioning of this together. And without getting into the deep details, or without going into too many solutioning details, we'll try to go over the design of the implementation. As the slides begin, at some point, Vivek is going to show you the slides after me, so I'll start, and then at some point I'll transition over so he can go over some use case details. Right? Let's start. Yeah, I think this is our starting point. So when we started working in this environment, one of the first things we noticed, and it as a practice, whenever Incept goes into an environment, one of the first things we try to always do is do a current assessment. Exactly what's the problem statement and what's going on in this organization. And I start at a design level, he starts focusing more at a, like talking to the business lines and talking to the places where they see some issues and stuff like that. In this particular case, I noticed how complicated the lay of the land was, right? So that was my first impression. My second impression was we had to get DQ assets deployed in a pipeline that we could not access, right? I also noticed how there was a lot of DQ happening in the organization. So it was not like I was bringing in new ideas, right? They knew data. So, oh. Sorry about that, thank you. So they had good data quality knowledge. They were just uncoordinated a little bit. And they were doing it in their own silos, their own lines of businesses. They just weren't doing it at an enterprise level. And so very quickly we figured out that that was the ask of us. And we needed to then go back to the drawing board and figure out the design that would work. I also want to say that the checks were broken into two main buckets. One was structure checks. So this is an environment where some external vendors, through a firewall, oftentimes through an SFTP solution, send large or very large files to their environment. And this happens at many different levels. But we were given, again, a problem statement that you have to work with files that may have 1 billion records or more. So that kind of defines the problem statement as well. We started working towards those structure checks at first, and we noticed how, and I don't want to say that this stuff can only be done using a vendor. We think it's vendor agnostic, but as we worked through, in this case, the vendor, it was apparent that the vendor themselves had not done a lot of this. So they were, on occasion, giving us ideas, but not a very clean implementation example. Okay, structure checks. In order for us to do the structure checks, we had some bare bones expectations. We had to open and read the file, and I mentioned this is a data pipeline that is black box, and that's one of the things we are not allowed to do. So we'll start with that. I talked about this being a large pharmaceutical example or customer. We talked about where data quality should be done, right? So if we had to do this kind of stuff, structure checks and actual quality checks, we needed to do it at a particular place in their data pipeline. When we began, they were doing it sometimes in silos, sometimes at the source, sometimes when the data had kind of landed into a Snowflake environment. I should also mention that this is an example of a company that had already chosen the mesh architecture by the time we went. So their strategy that was put in place was everything that comes in through data pipelines, it gets kind of loaded into this mesh architecture, and they had a lot of regulations set on mesh in terms of what you can load and what you can't load. And there were conditions or prerequisites put on data. For example, a typical prerequisite is you can do content checks only if the structure checks have passed, right? That's one quick example. Even for structure checks, there are some prerequisites, and there were a few like that. So Vivek and I started debating on this, as we often do on many matters, but in this particular case, and folks from Anthony's team, they engaged us in many debates, and we realized how we needed to do it at a particular spot. In this case, it was between the lake and the warehouse, right? We just chose that because that seemed like the most organic natural place for us to perform this exercise. Let's move on. Right. So as I mentioned, right, there is a raw layer, and the raw layer is a little uncertain. In other words, for certain files that are coming from external vendors, it can be an SFTP location. Internal files could already be present in an Oracle or a SQL Server database or some structured space. And they could also have internal content that is maybe in areas that are already like the raw layer that is already defined in a Snowflake environment. It's a little all over the place. So that defines our raw layer. We defined a schema layer which we thought would be our decision tree. So as we perform this exercise, if for some reason any of the checks failed, that is the spot where we would say that abort loading of the file. So don't go any far forward. And that could happen for a number of different reasons. But that's the place where we thought we would do that. In case the file loaded, right? So in case the structure check succeeded and the file loaded, we would begin to do content checks on the file. And content checks are similar to any data quality checks that you have experienced in the past, where you may have a need for. And there are thresholds for those. So that's not a 1 or a 0. There are some thresholds set for that. If those thresholds failed, then we would not load the data into the mesh architecture. So this enriched layer over there, that's the mesh. And data gets loaded in the mesh only after all of the content level DQ thresholds have met on the file, right? Let's move on to the next. Right. Now, these are the two scenarios we were dealing with from an architecture standpoint, and we had the freedom. I want to explicitly say that this is an example of a customer where Vivek and I were provided the freedom to design it any which way we wanted. We first explored the centralized approach, which was to bring their data into a centralized environment, right? And perform all of the DQ checks there. In fact, when we started, and this is something that I should mention, we didn't do this from scratch. In this particular environment, a vendor was present running an instance of this left picture, right? Data quality as a service. There was a vendor already present that was trying to get the centralized model up and running, but they had severe challenges. They had scalability issues. On occasion, their checks were not performing as well as the expectations were, and several other. And they were also doing some level of production support. When we got there and transitioned, we got stuck with certain production support issues as well. Those were the reasons why we pivoted away from the centralized model. We thought to ourselves that the centralized model, while it might work for data quality as a service for files that are not to like such large scale, if we need this model to scale, we cannot really do it in a centralized model. We need to get away from it and move to a federated model. Now, this particular exercise is one where we wanted to put together a COE. The idea of a COE was to have a small army of developers who were very focused on building data quality assets. The data quality assets in this space can be, for example, like if you're familiar with Informatica or Collibra or any other data quality company, they build data quality assets on the basis of, let's say, for example, Informatica does it for mappings. Collibra might have other example assets, and they are focused on, let's say, I want to do something for a null check, right? So if I want to look at a column and figure out how many nulls the column contains and then build a threshold for that, that's an example of an asset. So we figured out that a small army of developers who can just build assets like that would be a starting point, and the center of excellence would just churn those out. right, as per the requirements. And Vivek and I shifted our focus. We started working much closely with our business customers, trying to understand what kind of assets would you need, right? Do you need to check for duplicates? Do you need to check for nulls? What else do you need to check for? And we would come back to our team and just give them examples, and they would start developing. The idea was to always build those assets and almost string them together and move them into the company in the silo's own data pipeline. So each of those hexagons on the side, they have their own data pipelines that we have no access to, pipelines that we cannot see, data that we cannot see. But the expectation is that the assets you build, they go and perform, right, and be scalable. Let's move on. So some principles. Interusability. We did not want to build a data quality asset only for one silo. We wanted to perform that exercise, test it for the silo that we developed it for, but make it reusable. Make it so that we could take that, test it, right, see its execution in that particular silo, and then take it and give it to somebody else and have it work in that environment as well. We wanted to parameterize it, so we didn't develop anything in this environment that is so locked down, right, that you can only use it with certain values, right? We wanted to make it, we wanted to give the data pipeline developers too, because each of those silos have data pipeline developers, and we wanted to give them the freedom that they be able to take our data quality assets and develop them further. But when I say develop them further, I want to put a boundary condition. We put some boundary conditions on what they can and cannot do, and that was defined and locked down in the parameterization, right? We also created some bundles. So DQ assets were always reusable at a very unit level, right, which is a single DQ asset like a null check. DQ assets were also reusable at a package level. So if I put 15 of those together, right, and those 15 put together are performing a particular function in a data pipeline, we want to make sure that that's a bundle that somebody else can subscribe and use to in the future as well, right? Because we can't predict at what level they may need this. So we always thought that we'd do that. And these ideas a lot of times came also from the customer, right? I want to say that everything in this space, right? So when a lot of these DQ checks were done, we wanted to make sure that we are standardizing how we are writing data out and how we are creating the final dashboard for consumption. So a single dashboard layout was created, and in this case, this environment had Power BI, so we created a template that would work for every silo. We also created a data model that would stay consistent to every pipeline. Even though they were allowed to change the parameters, they would always write data to a single data model that was kind of locked down, reusable in the future. And we are still working in this environment. We are still working in this environment, trying to do more with it. One of the conditions we are working with is to make sure that model always stays in a very locked down state. CI/CD processes, so standard GitHub CI/CD processes and Terraform were used to kind of move data into higher environments and such. Let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, so this is where we want to explain some use cases, and I want to invite my colleague Vivek to kind of lead this through.
Thanks, Anurag. I hope everybody can hear me. So I think before I go into the use case, right, I think this was where it all kind of came together when we developed this solution. So essentially, for people who are trying to envision, the intent here is not to have this as a prescriptive solution, but essentially to have a thought around. So if you guys are looking to do something around data in your own organizations or in your own jobs and stuff like that, so this is where we want to talk about use cases. So essentially try to stimulate some thought around, okay, this might fit my scenario, and how I can do this without talking about tools, without talking about technology, just talking about how it all comes together through a vision of connected sources and stuff like that. So let's talk about use cases actually. So there were three main use cases surrounding this solution. We spoke a little bit about, Anurag spoke a little bit about that, right? So there was the first intent was to have this as a service. What I mean by that is that this solution would be available within the organization in certain locations because of some regulations and whatnot. People or data teams that wanted to use them could bring their data to this solution, invoke this data quality solution and run their data through it, get the results out, and then hop on to the next phase of it. While that would work for smaller scales and smaller data sets, it did not kind of work well with larger files and sets where data was constantly needed to be moved around or looked into as it kind of went through the solution. So that was a reason where the centralized approach in this case did not work very well. So that is not to say that it won't for anybody else. It was just that that use case wasn't a right fit for, that solution wasn't a right fit for this use case in this particular environment. Idea here is, of course, to make sure that whatever you do around a data quality solution is deployed, readily available. People can invoke them through multiple ways, be it through a database connection, be it through an API and so forth, and get their stuff done and move out, and the solution stays where it is. Another use case was for data at rest. What I mean by that is whatever data that you want to run through this quality solution is available either in a table or a flat file, and it is at rest for a duration of time. So it doesn't kind of moving through hops and stuff like that. So that was another use case for this solution. And the last one was data in motion. What I mean by that is essentially data is of course available in flat files and tables, but it is on its way somewhere, or during its journey, it needs to kind of take a little pause, get itself, run through this quality solution, and then move on based on the results of that the data quality solution. So these were the three use cases. The bottom two, the data at rest and data in motion, were the primary reasons where this federated approach worked better than the centralized, because there were many different sources, many different avenues for data to come in, many different places for data to reside while it's in there. And so the centralized approach would not kind of lend itself well for this particular scenarios. Let's talk a little bit about all of these, just a little bit. So like I said, the DQ as a service thing was a centrally hosted solution where the DQ assets and this corresponding technology was kind of deployed in one particular platform in an area, and it was kind of coming in, data was coming in or brought to it by different sources, got the results out, and then they moved on. There were the advantages and challenges for both of these things. So from a challenge perspective, in an environment where data was strictly regulated, geofenced, it cannot move from where it needs to be and so forth, this turned out to be they kind of added a lot of challenges in terms of performance and in terms of volume. So that was one of the reasons why this was not a good fit for a larger data set and for a diverse data set. Of advantages, of course, was the maintainability was awesome. Like it was basically one solution deployed, people would bring stuff to it, governance is easy, it can be effectively managed and executed from where it stays in one place, and obviously it is on demand. So when I need it, it's available, I invoke it, I get my stuff done, I moved on, I don't have to worry about the solution itself. I just bring my stuff to it, get my stuff done, and keep moving. Contrasting it to I think the slide header needs to say data at rest, but essentially DQ is, actually I think I have the next one. Yeah, so I think in this one, for a REST perspective, the solution itself is bundled and made available to data teams, as the diagram that we were kind of talking about earlier. And I think I might have one here. So the solution itself is bundled and delivered to the teams as a federated solution. I'll go back a couple of slides and we'll come back to this in a second here. Bundles were created by us, by the DQ team in a sense, they were made available as a decentralized solution, made available to the teams that wanted it. By decentralized and by made available to the teams, I don't mean that we basically just handed stuff over to them and said, okay, have at it, this is it. We provided the entire set of infrastructure and instructions of how these solutions can be actually implemented in a pipeline at the consuming systems end, executed, operated with proper CI/CD and so forth. So it was never a case of, I'll take my solution, change it, and then I've kind of upended the whole process. But the benefits of that, of course, were that these rules and this solution could be made domain specific. Within an organization, there were many different systems and domains who had different requirements and different perspectives at which they look at data. And so this was helpful in that scenario where people could take the solution, teams could take the solution, implement their particular perspective on it, and then get the results out of it, right? And the release and all of the maintenance was done by the centralized DQ team. So it was never out of version or out of requirements, so to speak, from the larger set. And the last one, I think this slide is a little bit incomplete. You cannot change it actually. The last one was for the data in motion. This was a use case where in this environment, a lot of external vendors were kind of sending large amount of data. In the case of pharma, there was study data, there was earmark medical information and whatnot. And they were coming in, and that needed to be cleansed before it was made available to the targeted user sets. And so the data in motion use case was geared towards that before I could get this, because by the time we do this, once the data is loaded into the environment, it was too late. Like we've expended a lot of effort, a lot of cost has been incurred already of putting the data in, and then realizing that, oh, this is not going to work for us because it's half of it is blank or half of it is not good and so forth. So the use case around this was as soon as it comes in, there were some very basic fundamental checks that were operated on that data set. So like Anurag mentioned, is the structure level checks, like is the file formed correctly, is it named correctly, does it have the right extension, does it have the right column names and so forth. Once you pass those basic preliminary checks, that is when you're confident that I've not expended a lot of effort, time and cost to load this information. I know it is now reasonably correct and I can let it move on through the process where I can do more stuff with it. So the data in motion use case was around that. And that was one of the key aspects of how this particular organization used it. So the teams were able to then basically take this, kind of have that pipeline already built, just create an additional hop to have the data run through this DQ solution and then keep moving with what we're doing, right? And I think the last two slides, I think, is basically the representation of those two architectures. So in this one, of course, the solution is in the center and different business lines, if you will, just to kind of demonstrate a particular organization. Come and use it, take that stuff, and keep moving. And in the second scenario, this solution still is within the DQ Center of Excellence. It's in the center, maintained and managed by a technical team, but it is federated out to the different business units or different consuming systems. They can install it, operate it within their pipelines, make use out of it, and then use the results and go forth. This also helps with keeping the boundaries around data intact. So if I'm never, as a part of a technical team, I'm actually never looking at the data, nor am I ever kind of dealing with the information which I should not be based on regulations and so forth. So this helps with that too. So that was the idea around a federated solution. I think with that we've come to the end of the slides, and I guess Mark, you're taking over.
Sure. So please, Anurag, Vivek, take a seat on the panel. I'd like to invite Dinesh Shand, also architect with Incept, to take a seat, and Anthony Scardino. One of the people, one of the clients at the enterprise is Sanofi. So, yeah, I guess it becomes obvious when you look him up. So, all right. So there are a lot of questions on WOVA, so thank you so much for that. Let's get started with one.
All right.
Oh, thank you.
I got it, don't worry.
Yeah, thank you.
How many engineers does it take to keep a board up?
Just one. I did it.
I've got a question here. How did you provide a view for the data consumers to show overall data health?
Sorry, say that.
Yeah. How did you provide a view for the data consumers for overall data health?
I'll go. So as
Yeah.
Anurag actually mentioned, right? So the entire solution was backed by a self-developed data model. So it basically did a few things. I'll stand up so people can actually see me talking. The model itself had three elements. So there was a reference aspect to it, where we had the reference information that was needed for the solution to operate. There was a results aspect to it, where it would basically store the actual results once the solution runs through a data set. So, and then there was a third aspect which was more technical to kind of have the solution manage itself. But between the reference and the results aspect is where once a solution runs this data set through it, the results were stored in two ways into the results section of the data model. One is a summary, which was used for summarized reporting of numbers, which were linked to the executive KPI level. So you could say that I ran 1 billion rows through this solution, out of which 70% of the data passed, 30% failed for this particular rule or whatever rules that you apply. And then ultimately the results, that was what was leveraged to show on a central globalized dashboard, which was in this instance on top of Power BI.
Can I
Anthony, you
quickly,
can,
yeah.
Actually, I'll project. So I also want to say above and beyond the model that they've got on a dashboard for people to consume this information, this is always an agile developing solution. We also have a data catalog as a complementary solution to the data quality technology and solution. That being said, ultimately the end goal vision here is to provide even above and beyond just a dashboard that more technical consumers will make sense of. We want data quality and trustworthiness of data to be accessible by everyone in the organization. And you're able to do that using complementary solutions such as data catalog. And this is something that we are bringing. It's not instant. We are developing both of them independently, and we're actually only very recently bringing them together.
Can I quickly add one?
No? Okay, no. Go for it.
So one of the we talked about the DQ Center of Excellence, and Anthony explained the intervention and the usage of the data catalog. As we explored that, one of the asks, one of the requirements was also to perform a lot of, well, as much as possible, DQ operations from within the catalog. So one of the preferences in this environment is to somehow almost drive the adoption of the catalog inside the environment and allow folks that are in the catalog to be able to use the assets that we have developed. And that includes, if somebody is going into the catalog, looking up the asset, right? And thinking, hey, this is one of the assets that I came here to explore. Can I profile this asset, right? And can I run some data quality on this asset while I'm here? Now, those are things that I imagine a lot of catalog users ask, they want to know. But to make that happen, there are several integrations out there in the open market. I suspect they all do a small percentage of this. This particular exercise, we wanted to do a lot more, and that's one area where Anthony and Dinesh helped us out a lot, because Anthony is the product manager in this space for the catalog, and Dinesh is one of the lead architects in that space.
I'm going to add something too. I'm sorry. The one thing that did not get talked about or mentioned is the word governance. Catalog has to be combined with governance and quality, right? Think of this as, I believe Gartner prediction is that in the future, the market is going to change where a lot of these products are in one platform. So data quality, data privacy, data catalog, data governance. You have everything available in a single platform, and that's what the market is going towards. It is nice to have that vision as well, especially as a service model. So think of this: I come in, I need access to sales data. There's a marketplace. I know who owns it. I know what the quality is. I know what the trust level is. I can make sure what policies are related to it. Everything is available in one spot. It helps and drives as a service or as a product. If we come into the idea that data is a product, it needs to have SLAs, and quality is one. Stewardship, ownership, governance, privacy, everything else adds to the SLAs. And so think of this as a continuum. Quality is one piece of it. Thank you.
If I
Can
may.
I ask you guys to just switch so that you can have a mic?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Let's do that.
That's perfect.
Because there's only 4 of these.
Right. I'd also like to contribute one more fact. Is that
That was one question, by the way.
Yeah.
We'll finish answering. So.
Hey, there's a lot going on.
So we've seen some themes that we keep hearing in data that are present here, right? And an evolution of the solution. The original solution, as you can tell, was siloed, right? People were able to use a common denominator, but they were using it themselves, and there was a lot of waste in that. When you bring it to center, I like that Anurag called these things assets, right? Because the assets are reusable, and that is obviously a very big hot word for data, right? If it's a reusable asset, we're not reinventing the wheel. There are several businesses that can use the same quality rules.
Thank you, Anthony.
Yep.
All right, there's one here that's got 5 votes. So let me tee it up for you guys. In a data mesh architecture, right? So are there well-established or foundational models for product and asset data as a service?
It's a very good question. There are models available, for sure. If you explore things from a master data standpoint, products are definitely available. And one of the premises of master data governance or master data framework is to load cleansed data while producing the master, right? But that's not to say that this is an example where that model may be there, but it is not the last hop for the data. As we talked about DQ assets being reusable, we should also talk about data and data products being usable. And while it is fundamentally MDM's job to produce clean data as it's producing a master, when data moves across, right, it loses some of its perspective. And that's where this comes in. I want to kind of also speak from an end state. You can start with, let's say, for example, a product model. But when you finish and you're looking at data in a dashboard and you're wanting to just explore quality numbers, sometimes those models have changed and changed several times by the time a consumer is looking at it.
And I imagine the data mesh concept is very much based on these multiple data product layers. That we saw the original data mesh is definitely the producers and the consumers. Even the consumers create products. They're more in terms of reporting and analysis and so on and so forth. But you can still classify them as a data product. In fact, the catalog catalogs not only data assets but also reports. Correct?
That's correct. And whole model and framework of the data mesh, right? And what Anurag demonstrated earlier is that quality, the further upstream quality is, the better off you are, because otherwise you run the risk of people doing quality checks against the product where the quality issue is much, much further upstream, right? I love that slide because it's an important lesson, because we would just waste a lot of time, and the quality is found elsewhere, and ultimately leads to a more trustworthy product in the end.
All right,
Mark, can we?
Oh, yeah, you want to say something?
I was going to say,
Yes.
like, I hope you get to one other question, which is kind of awesome. One of the user-driven config thing. Is that
Yes,
what you're going to go to?
that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, I think people who asked this question, it was amazing. One of the key things that we struggled with was this, that how do we get the solution to accept the intent of people? Like, I need to give it instructions.
Can you repeat the question?
So sorry, I think I should do that, right? Obviously. The questions were, seems like you used config-driven approach, which is human intensive and scaling can be difficult. How did you scale, or scaling is not a problem for you? That's what I'm trying to answer. Scaling is obviously a problem for us, and especially in this environment where data was, in a federated environment where data was brought to this from multiple places. So config was absolutely vital.
And in fact, am I correct in saying that initially you had a data quality solution in place, and its problem was that it didn't scale?
That's right.
Right. And I think, so from a config perspective, we did a couple things. The initial start off, which is still the case, is essentially a template-driven approach, where we laid out the different capabilities of the solution, clubbed them together with, so whether it was a structure check or a content check, so there was two major categories of a data quality check, just to kind of narrow and keep things simple from a user perspective. And then that template, it was an Excel template. It was not very fancy, but it was fancy in terms of what it drove. So it was a configurable Excel template where users were able to kind of give instructions to this solution based on a set of questions and drop-down features that we had configured. And that was actually pumped into an Excel, into a table, Snowflake table on the back end, which was what the solution used to drive itself. So it was, the intent was accepted from the user in a format that they were comfortable with, because if we were going to ask them to kind of write database queries and stuff, we were going to lose them. That was never going to happen. So the Excel method of accepting their intent was the best way to do this from a user perspective. And then we took that information, and before the solution could act on it, pump that into a database table, which was then the driver of the entire solution. The eventual goal is to basically turn this whole config process into a UI-based setup. So it becomes like a wizarding thing where people are asked a series of questions, they answer them, and the solution basically creates a config for them, which takes away the effort of filling out Excel sheets and ultimately brings a UI aspect to it, which it is centrally hosted and people can kind of use them. Even if the solution is not centrally hosted, the configuration part could be a centrally hosted thing.
Thank
I
you,
just want to
Vivek.
quickly add the information of the configuration files. The information from the configuration files also goes into the same model, the model that is used for results. And the idea there is, as they see the results, if they want to go back to their configuration, they're easily able to do it.
Okay, we're going to move to questions from the audience, the live audience that's here. Thank you very much for putting all your a lot of questions in WOVA. We're going to answer all the questions, but take a look this afternoon or tomorrow. We'll answer every single question. Please.
Hi, Randall Cole, Department of the Navy here. Coming from an organization that has thousands, maybe depending on how you count, tens of thousands of data sources, interested in whether you found that the data quality assessment process enabled you to identify low value or even unnecessary data sources to help with rationalization and simplifying.
There was a lot of that happened for sure, yes, because there are a lot of redundant information coming at this solution from multiple places. it was not always a case of people wanting to do duplicative things. It was also the case of information that was not, kind of known to everybody. So they were like, "Oh, bringing in the same sources to do this." This was able to highlight some of those things. And not all. I will never claim that all of it went away because of just this, but this helped with that. That hey, these three sources brought by three different teams seems like they are very, very similar, if not same. And so maybe the solution gave the information back that maybe you need to start kind of taking a look at that. That we're paying three different vendors to give us the same data, and maybe we should not.
So it's the federated functionality that helped with that.
And yeah, the solutions were federated, but the technical team had an eye on all of that stuff, and the dashboards would reveal some of that information.
I'll contribute to that a little bit because certainly among my business units and corporate functions, there's a huge desire for this, right? Above and beyond the quality aspect, which will reveal things, there are other capabilities. I'm the data catalog owner, if it's not pretty clear by now, right? So within the data catalog that we utilize, there are capabilities for similarity checks, right? So if we are provided by the owners of the data sources accessibility to be able to read the data from a system-to-system perspective. The tool does have capabilities to say, hey, we believe that this column or this table is entirely similar to this other table or column, and it does expose that information. However, as Dinesh pointed out, stewardship is absolutely critical, right? Because you need people that are interested in it, and then you need either those people or people that are on those people's teams to actually take action.
Yeah.
Another question.
Go for it. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Gilles Simler from MIT. Data quality is best when it's done at the source or at the point of entry. How are you operationalizing your findings about the quality of your data and talk back to the business about this is what you need to change in your source systems, not in transit between the lake and the warehouse?
Yeah. That's a very good question. So there's a whole lessons learned exercise that happens after the fact when we examine and pick up patterns from dashboards. So this exercise produces dashboards that data quality product owners and data governance product owners, they look at. But history is important. So one of the salient features of this exercise is to produce a lot of history and allow them to look at that and discover patterns. And the idea is to then go back to the folks that are producing data, right, at the source system level, and explain to them a pattern, and maybe if they ask, also advise on a potential solution. And this exercise is, I imagine it's going to happen over a period of time, and perhaps for a very long time, because the sources are so diverse, and they're coming in using so many different channels that one size does not fit all.
We hear a lot about observability and data quality checks and so on and so forth, and they do tend to happen a little further down the pipeline to see whether the data is fit for use and fit for purpose. But you're absolutely right. We have to go back and do some root cause analysis, and that's part of a larger data quality program where you've got to put data management in place to kind of address some of the issues. Obviously, a data quality system like this doesn't address all of the problems with data. It just basically gives a window into the problems, and then you get choices into being able to fix them at the source way better. Yeah.
A couple people over here.
I think Anthony has a point to make as well.
Oh, Anthony.
A final comment on that, and I'll be brief. Fundamentals are really important, right? Because data quality will expose the issues, right? But you need action, right? And a lot of companies will not be action-oriented, right? Happy to have a dashboard that exposes we're compliant, we're not compliant, and then what, right? So it's always fundamentals. Our data comes from external sources as well as internal, right? And having processes with our external providers to do issue resolution, root cause analysis, and holding them accountable for the quality of the data, and holding the data source owners of our own internal data accountable for the quality of the data, is critical, right? Dashboards only do so much. They just reveal, right? You have to have process.
One more question, we're almost done.
And mine's
Put
more
it
of a-
in
yeah.
WOVA if you're gonna, we'll answer it, promise.
Okay.
And you can come
Just-
in, just one second, and you can come and see us at our booth. Anthony will be there after the session, and you can ask questions, no problem.
This goes to the quality assessment, okay? And just clarifying, is the source of truth for quality assessment, is that actually the data catalog that you're bumping against to provide like exception reporting to say, go fix this problem? What is your source of truth that you're saying, this is what we're gonna go against to determine we've got an issue?
Actually, they'll be.
Go ahead.
These guys will be able to explain it more. The data catalog is another exposure tool, right, that provides the metrics to the people so they can assess the trustworthiness of the data. However, their central dashboard is really part of the overall solution that was implemented here. We're only just starting to add the catalog as an integrated part of the solution to expose it to more people. But their solution is really the heart of it.
Yeah. And I'll quickly add that in terms of the actual quality of the asset itself, the trends were the biggest help. So when we first started, like let's say a source would come in and we would do this, we didn't know, there were not always a clear path back to the source to say, okay, this seems like a thing to fix, because these were external files which just dropped somewhere. We couldn't always get back to the actual provider of the data and so forth. What we then decided to do was actually utilize a trend and then bring that trend back to the sources through the channels. That I've used this file for the last 7 days that you've given me, and it has not changed. Like the data quality is still the same on this particular metric. So if I'm looking for nulls, it continues to have 15% nulls. So what gives? So we brought the data that we collected from the actual running of the solution back to the sources. So that's one way to do it, because you probably always, you don't always have a channel back to the provider directly to say, fix this, and
you do want your catalog to give you the lineage. So all of those answers that you're looking for, you want them answered by the catalog, ideally.
I'm going to step in and help us wrap up. Mark is going to mention something that's coming
Yes.
up shortly.
So we have a roundtable from 1 to 2 this afternoon on the 14th floor. If you want more details, want to ask more questions, come and see us there. We'll be able to answer all your questions. Informatica will be there with us as well, so you can ask questions of Informatica if you wish. Anthony will be there too. It's going to be a party.
Thanks, everybody. We have about 90 minutes for networking and lunch. I will mention Informatica and Incept will be hosting a party.